The great scholar of settler colonialism, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, Patrick Wolf, said that the historical phenomenon of settler colonialism is not an event, it's a structure. Settler colonialist movements appeared all over the world in the last 400 years. Europeans left Europe because they were persecuted for religious, economic, cultural reasons, and they settled in non-European parts of the world, hoping to create a new Europe there, hoping to create even democratic societies there, but always encountering the presence of indigenous native population. And in the encounter with the native population, settler movements usually tried to remove, by all means possible, the indigenous population. It has taken quite a while for the academic world, let alone the media and the politicians, to accept that Zionism is a classical case study of settler colonialism. The fact that this is one of the most active settler colonial case study today does not invalidate this definition of Zionism as a settler colonialist movement and Israel as a settler colonial state. In fact, in my university in 2015, we had a brilliant conference organized by our postgraduate students called Settler Colonialism in Palestine. And was immediately the Zionist lobby in this country created an outcry, started to outcry against this conference. And the pressure on my university came as high up as from the Prime Minister's office at the time, David Cameron, to cancel what they called an anti-Semitic conference. Luckily, our Vice Chancellor asked the Prime Minister's office if they know what settler colonialism is. And the answer was that they don't. So he invited them. He said, I don't know either what it is. Why don't you come to Exeter and let's see what does it mean. But that just shows you how far we should celebrate our small victories. We don't have big victories in the liberation of Palestine, so let's at least celebrate the small ones. And this is a small victory, but a significant one. Changing the discourse, at least in the academia, about Palestine by calling Zionism a settler colonialist movement and defining Israel as a settler state. Now, as a settler colonial movement and later as a settler state, you have two ambitions, basically, to secure the settler community. One is geographical and the other is demographic. The geographical ambition is to take as much as you can of the new homeland that you covet for yourself. And Zionism, since 1882 until today, made a concentrated effort to get as much of Palestine as possible. And in 1967, succeeded in taking over historical Palestine from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean. The other concern is demographic. You want to have an exclusive demographic presence in the new homeland. This was a problem for Zionism at the early stages when the Jews in the 1930s were only 1/3 of the population in Palestine. They were still only 1/3 of the population in 1947 when the United Nations granted them half of the homeland of the Palestinians, despite the fact that out of the Jewish population, a large number had only arrived in Palestine 3 years earlier. But the Jewish state succeeded in enticing and attracting Jewish immigration from around the world, and the demographic situation has definitely improved from the Zionist perspective until the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Suddenly, the demographic success of 1948, in which that was produced by the ethnic cleansing of half of Palestine's population during the 1948 war, this success was irrelevant when the geographical appetite grew and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were occupied in the June 67 war. So since 1967, Israel has, as a settler state, has a geographical achievement. It doesn't need to aspire for anything more, contrary to some kind of what do you call them? Mu'amara. Conspiracy, thank you. You can see that I gave 3 interviews in Arabic this morning. Contrary to conspiracy theories that are prevalent, Israel does not aspire geographically to go beyond the historical borders of Palestine, that is beyond the river Jordan and the historical mandatory land of Palestine. So geographically, there is a huge achievement. However, demographically, that achievement, as I mentioned before, did not only not resolve the demographic issue, in fact, it created new demographic realities which Israelis find very difficult to deal with. Now, Oslo should be seen, and now we can say it now more confidently, 25 years on. The Oslo process should be seen from the Israeli point of view as part of the methodology of the settler state to solve this kind of interaction between geography and demography, between population and territory. Oslo is not, from an Israeli point of view, an idea that emanates from peacemaking, from a wish to reconcile, from an attempt to bring an end to bloodshed or a conflict. No, Oslo is just another means, from an Israeli point of view, just another means of solving this tension. How can I have as much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible, without losing my place in the community of civilized nations, without undermining my reputation as the only democracy in the Middle East. Now, what is interesting, that in order to do that, you needed to do many things in the dark, behind the scenes, because it's full of fabrication. This is an impossible issue reconcile. You cannot have a Jewish state and a democratic state. I think toddlers already understand that this is an impossible reality. You cannot have an arrangement of redeployment of the Israeli army and convince the Palestinians that this is the end of the conflict. And it takes time, either for Palestinians or for the international community, to call your bluff. It doesn't always happen immediately, especially with the histrionics of a ceremony in the White House, the unbelievable Nobel Peace Prizes given to people like Peres and Rabin, who are actually war criminals. This kind of charade is a screen that does not allow some good people, educated people, important people, to understand the reality for what it is. But the screen is not that thick. It takes time. And then eventually people understand that they were misled, and that the whole motive for the Oslo Accord was to allow the settler colonial state to enjoy international immunity for its impunity on the ground. And the impunity on the ground meant unilateral policies that allow the state to use any methods it wishes to have as much of the space of the territory as possible, with as few of the people as possible in the 21st century. In 1948, you could achieve it by massively expelling the Palestinians. You can't do it in 1921. So you enclave them. You put them in ghettos. You put them into Bantustans. You do not allow them to move out of the villages, and you get the same effect as moving them out of the villages. These are the preoccupation of 3 generations of Israelis, administrators, bureaucrats, generals, strategies, how to police millions of Palestinians in a way that would not undermine the image of Israel as a democracy, and would reconcile what is impossible to reconcile, the wish to have the land without the people, in a modern world where everything is transparent, where you have an internet and alternative media that does not allow you to hide behind your criminal activity. You can use all kinds of tactics. You can equate the Palestinian resistance with Islamic terrorism and hope that this would explain to people why you continue to do what you do. You can say, compare what I'm doing to what's happening in Syria and Iraq, and hope that people would say, oh, yes, compared to Syria and Iraq, what you do is nothing. And of course, you hope that people would not remember that what you've been doing for 100 years, not since 2011, to the indigenous population. And then, and this is the biggest fabrication of Oslo, you sell what might sound as a logical, academic kind of solution. Let's first have peace, and then everything bad we are doing would be stopped. This is the basis of Oslo. Let's have peace, and if peace is successful, Israel would stop arresting people without trial, demolishing houses, assassinations, expulsions. Everything will be all right once we have peace. But of course, the only formula, and even Palestinians who support the two-state solution and were involved in the initial and later stages of Oslo said it to the Israelis, no, it's the other way around. You should stop the occupation. You should take your military out, and then we can have a chance for a dialogue about peace on a much more equal footing. But if you continue to have the dialogue with us while you occupy us, this is not a peace process, and not surprisingly, everybody in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip would tell you that life was much better before Oslo than it is after Oslo. I think that if you want to understand what has shifted in the Israeli policy tactically, not strategically, is the late Israeli nationality law, and to see how it connects to Oslo, and with this I will end. Because I think it's very important to see the historical picture in its entirety and in a clear sense. The only thing that fundamentally changed in the way the political and military strategic elite in Israel perceives the reality and envisions the future, the only thing that really has changed is the move from behind the scene to the front stage. They would not do an Oslo again. They would not meet secretly behind the scene. They don't believe that this is necessary. They do not lie to themselves as liberal Zionists do. They are very honest. They're very transparent. They express very clearly who they are and what they want to do. Whereas the people who did Oslo, who were behind, the architects of Oslo, all the time hoped that they can talk the talk but not walk the walk, that they can say something behind closed door and say something else on the stage, and somehow navigate successfully for the sake of navigation, not in order to get into any destination. What the Israeli nationality law says to us, that there's a new way of thinking in Israel in tactical sense. The ideology of settler colonialism is the same. The vision of having as much of the land of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it is the same. What has changed is the methodology. And the methodology is very clear in the new Israeli nationality law. And with this I would end. The Israeli nationality law brings to the fore new, old, two concepts, which are very important for anyone who wants to be engaged with Israel and Palestine. One concept is the state of Israel, and the other concept is the land of Israel. The law makes a clear distinction between the two. It defines the state of Israel, the place where only the Jews have the right for self-determination, and the Palestinians are degraded to the people who speak Arabic, the Arab speakers. They're not people of any ethnic or racist or religious faith. They are defined by the language they speak. This is why the Druze community in Israel, that was very loyal to the Jewish state, served in the army, administered the occupation, became so panicky when they understood what the law means. Because now they were demoted from good Arabs who served the Jewish state into people who speak Arabic, who would never have the same rights as the people who do not speak Arabic or Arabic is not their mother tongue. I looked very hard in history to see if any other country in modern times defined its minority only according to the language it taught. There are several examples, and the only thing that one can say about these examples that this were not part of a democratic fabric, but always part of a dictatorial, non-democratic reality. So this is the state of Israel. What is the land of Israel? The land of Israel is a space that doesn't have borders according to the nationality law. Its borders are still open. And the land of Israel is transformed into the state of Israel with only one methodology or method. And they call it hityashvut, settlement. I would call it colonization. Namely, future colonization or Judaization of areas which are now inhabited by Palestinians would automatically, which was not the case until today, would automatically turn the new colonies and the old colonies in the West Bank into part of the state of Israel. So any Palestinian who lives in those areas or in the areas leading to the new and old colonies are now not only inhabitants of the West Bank, they are also now the people who speak Arabic under the sovereignty of the Jewish state. Now, how far would the Jewish colonization go? The law doesn't say. For that, you have to look at other documents, at other evidence. And it's very clear that there are strong political powers in Israel that want to annex as much of the West Bank as possible, enclave Gaza, or put it under the PA's authority if they can. And for Israelis, this is not an arrangement. This is not an ad hoc kind of solution. This is a strategy. This is something that they think they can live for generations to come as part of their idea of survival and of existence. And they have 3 generations of experience. They have a capital of experience how to police millions of people without the world doing anything, with the world being involved in false charades of peace like the Oslo Accord, and political elites still talking about the two-state solution if this is realistic, and not adhering to what the civil society, here in other words, tell them, now it's not the time for peace. Now it's the time for action against the Jewish state through the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, and the pressure on Israel to stop its unilateral destruction of Palestine that has been going on for too long. Thank you.